and I'm a technical specialist here at K2, and today we're going to go through a quick presentation on SharePoint and K2 and building enterprise applications. Alright, so to get started, just a quick agenda. We'll do a brief introduction into SharePoint and some of the things around SharePoint, some of the challenges you might be facing with SharePoint when you're trying to reach into your enterprise, a little bit of the K2 fundamentals, what makes up K2, and then we'll dive into K2 and SharePoint together, following up with a quick demonstration. So we'll walk through a quick demonstration of using K2 inside of SharePoint, and then of course a question and answer at the end of the session as well. So again, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to use that questions panel. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about SharePoint. So SharePoint comes with quite a lot of facility or utilities. Things like enterprise content management, metadata, enterprise search, BI, document imaging, social capabilities, as well as our typical lists and libraries to store and create content in that respect. But what we really need is something that's a little bit more integrated with our enterprise. So how can we exploit those powerful features within SharePoint and use that in a collaborative way amongst our enterprise? And so really that's kind of what we're talking about today, is being able to bring and create powerful applications that bring together our line of business, have enterprise-grade capabilities, and also integrate with other systems as well. So built centrally inside that SharePoint, and really use SharePoint as a collaboration area. And so that's kind of going to be what I'm going to show today in our example, is using SharePoint in that collaborative manner. Alright, so a little bit about K2 before we get started. We've been around since about 2000. We do have over 270 employees worldwide. Our success is basically built on top of our customer success. As I mentioned, we have offices worldwide as well as distributors of K2 as well. Now we have over 2,500 customers hosting 1 million users, so people that actually use K2. Again, we're a global company, so we're across the globe. And 15%, obviously, as you can see on this slide, are Fortune 100 companies. So again, just a brief introduction into K2 and a little bit of our background. All right, so with that aside, let's talk a little bit about workflow and why that's important in today's discussion, and specifically around SharePoint. So really, workflow is an important piece and an important category coming up within that SharePoint environment. So if we look at the statistics, 32% of the processes involve or are being invested in workflow automation. So why is workflow as a category so popular anyway within business? And it's really important to understand and define what is really meant by workflow. And the next slide will kind of talk about the different looks of, or the different types of workflow as we see it, and how we can actually gather information depending on those different types of workflow. So workflow is really often that starting place for many organizations, and typically some organizations use SharePoint because of the powerfulness and some of the collaboration environment as that starting point. And so what we really want to do is be able to take that investment of SharePoint and streamline that into our enterprise. So we want to take our manual business tasks such as expense claims, etc., and make that a little bit more automated and avoid duplicating data entry, which is sometimes the case when we have a workflow inside of things like SharePoint. So, and really to think about workflow, it really allows organizations to automate tasks in order to reduce costs and of course improve visibility, and that's really the goal of what we're doing here. And today we're really going to focus on enterprise applications, so maybe even going a little bit beyond that SharePoint environment. So let's talk a little bit about the different types of workflows, and specifically around the SharePoint environment. And we'll talk about some of the challenges that are faced within the current set of capabilities. So first we see things that are more item-centric. So workflows generally revolving around a document or a list item. So our simplest of workflows, and that's usually where we tend to start when we're thinking about automation and using SharePoint, and really taking that element of SharePoint content through a review and approval cycle. So again, that basic scenario, item-centric. Generally the forms are relatively simple, so there might not be a lot of need for line of business integration. And again, the reason I'm bringing this up is because as we go further to the right, it becomes more enterprise. So some of the examples we might see in this type of scenario would be document review and approvals, leave management with maybe out-of-the-box calendar lists, and list and library style type of workflows. Now if we move over to the further to the right, we have something that's a little bit more form-centric. So workflow applications that change direction a little bit, where rather than focusing on an individual list item or document library. So the focus is more on the data, the line of business data that might reside inside or even outside of SharePoint. And in fact, different systems that might take place here. And the focus really on this particular type of workflow is on capturing and reviewing the data throughout the structured approval cycle. So again, we have a little bit of a structured approval cycle. As we go to the next level, we'll actually see something a little bit more where we've got ad hoc approval cycles. These workflow applications still do involve SharePoint, so we have some SharePoint content like document attachments. Maybe we want to store or upload documents to SharePoint, or even provision a site relative to the process, records management. And these workflows definitely tend to span different teams and departments, so it's a lot of collaboration across the organization. And of course, when we have collaboration that expands across the organization, reporting becomes really important. So we want to have reporting as we incorporate different systems, audit trails, and workflow performance, etc. Things we typically see inside of this type of silo is things like expense claims, requests, employee self-service. SharePoint governance would be a big thing here because of the creation of SharePoint sites relative to maybe a specific process, task management, accounts payable, etc. The next piece we'd see is something a little bit more business critical workflows. So these workflow applications are about using SharePoint, and in our case today, K2, to deliver organizations' core business processes and solutions. So it's about building those business applications, making the best use of SharePoint and all the features that it contains, as we saw in slide 1 with enterprise content management, web content management, records management, etc., using those powerful features within SharePoint and exposing those or exploiting them. So again, providing business insight throughout the reports and dashboards. Everyone has accessibility to those that require the approval. And also the breadth and complexity to these solutions that might span outside of SharePoint itself. So spanning across the enterprise, but still delivering them through the SharePoint site, so making them accessible and easier to use. Examples of this is things like customer intake, new customer intake, contracts management, incident management. Today's example I'm going to show is HR onboarding. So because it does touch multiple departments, it does have multiple users, and each one of those departments and users might have their own processes as well. So we'll talk about a little bit of that and show that in the demonstration today. So let's kind of drill into one of these and just kind of see some of the differences within the applications and what we're going to see. So if we look at Itemscentric, we kind of see a little bit of what we actually need. So we need task information, we have the related document, etc. And what some of the questions that come up is, do we have all the information, or what additional information might we need? So who's the sales rep? Who's the customer? Do we have existing or outstanding payments? So you want to be able to see all this information inside of a form. And so this is really where we start leveraging a little bit of the SharePoint and K2 functionality together. So if we look at building something like that just in SharePoint, we might see that we need to interact with line of business systems. And if you're in SharePoint 2010, you might use BCS or external lists. And then some things to think about as we go through this, the support of external lists in 2013. Well, we now have web services. So being able to create web services, so think about the code required to create those web services and apply that to your workflow. But what if I want to use that same information maybe in a report or inside of a form? When you create those web services, you're limited to just that SharePoint environment. And additionally, you might be copying unprotected data. So what kind of security is around those web services? And how do we make the decisions based on data that's been copied over? Sometimes you need real-time live data as opposed to data that's been copied over. Now if we look at the K2 perspective on this, again, we have to get the same information from line of business systems, but what we use is something called smart objects that allows us a reusable asset. And so it's configuration instead of writing code. We don't have to write code, we don't have to write web services, but we connect to that information real time at the source. Once we have that information, again, we have a reusable asset that allows us to use that information from our line of business into our reports, our forms, and of course our workflows. So again, it's about reusability, building quickly and efficiently, and getting to market faster. So let's talk about forms. So we've talked about how we access our information. Let's talk about how we get our information onto our forms. With SharePoint, you can use things like InfoPath or SharePoint design forms and create those inside of your workflows. Again, some things to think about as you move forward in changing of versions with SharePoint if you desire to do so. You have no support for InfoPath with the 2013 style support. Limited code editor, and again, the visualization of the workflows are taken out of 2013. And then of course you have multiple forms are needed to review a single task. So a lot of custom development is being created. And our purpose here is to create and simplify our SharePoint integration. On the K2 side, again, using that smart object, our reusable asset, connecting to our data source real time, we can now generate and create forms. So transforming that information or that data into something readable, connecting to different line of business systems. So not just the employee information, but we want to connect to CRM, SAP, etc., all within the same form. So you have a nice friendly UI. And of course, being able to reuse that same data that we capture as part of the workflow or even as part of our form inside of our report. So we want full visibility, and maybe even tying that form together with a report so we can actually see, for a sales rep, they want to see information relative to their region. Maybe they want to see that in a graphical format. And again, being able to leverage these reusable assets to do so. So again, we talked a little bit about some of the different types and styles of workflow and being able to build that and some of the challenges that you might face building those type of things inside of SharePoint, especially when you start integrating with your enterprise and bringing line of business information into this system, whether that you want to look into your reports, your forms, or your workflows themselves. And if you saw my webcast last week where we talked about simple workflows, we kind of stayed on the item-centric side. We kind of talked about simple workflows and how we can leverage K2 even for the simple ones. Today we're talking about more enterprise or expanding outside of that SharePoint environment. And so again, really what we have is the ability to expand. So SharePoint alone doesn't really give us what we need from a workflow perspective, and people really need applications that integrate and run within SharePoint, but still need applications that expand across their enterprise. So you still want to use your lists and content types and documents, but how do we exploit those? And so some of the information that I'll show you shortly will show you how you can use K2 to exploit some of that information and use SharePoint as that collaboration environment. So really building those powerful applications. So you still have your SharePoint environment, tying K2 on top of that to build those system and enterprise related workflows. So if we talk about K2 and what K2 offers from that, you have easy to build workflows, so managing your existing investments, so it's not about creating a new investment. In fact, if you have a current system, things like SAP that have their own workflow, but you might want to be able to expand that across the enterprise, maybe pull some of that information into SharePoint or use it in another process. SAP workflows don't allow you to do that by themselves. How do we extend that? And so that's really where K2 comes into play, is being really that bridge between your systems. So it's leveraging your existing investments, but applying a true automated workflow on top of that. Powerful, making sure that you have the ability to build across and span your enterprise with keeping in mind the process volumes, and also, of course, if you have any audit information that you need to capture, K2 does that automatically. So you have access to anything that's been touched in a workflow, from when a user picked up a task, how long it took them to use that task. If they delegated that task to different users, you have access to that information very quickly, very easy. And of course, portability. So nowadays we're doing things mobilely, or doing things on our mobile devices, or we're out of the office and want to be able to action a task via email. And so being able to do that inside of the application, or building those workflows that expand in our enterprise. So if I'm on my mobile app, I want to see CRM information. I don't want to have to be in the office to see that CRM information, but still applying that security. So again, making things a little bit more portable, powerful, and easier. And that's really what K2 is about in building these applications. So if we look at K2 and SharePoint together, some of the features that come with K2 for SharePoint specifically, is the ability to build and run forms within that SharePoint environment. So here you've got the ability to see your information inside of that SharePoint environment. So I've got CRM information, employee information, as well as some reporting information as well related to this specific task. So I can see everything all in one place. This is all a K2 form. Whoa, we went really fast to the end. Let's go ahead and go back here. Just go back to slide 4 and go forward. And just spin through this real quickly. Apologies for that. The scrolls on our mouse, my mouse really took me to the end of my presentation there. All right, so we've got our forms to be able to see our information inside of SharePoint. What I just showed you was a K2 specific form that showed all the information from CRM, being able to add an employee into SharePoint as well as reporting. Designing workflows. You have the ability to design workflows in graphical code, no code environment. Here we've got a SharePoint workflow design experience. We also have 3 other design experiences, and again, depending on your skill set, if you want to do it inside of Visual Studio, feel free to do so. It's all very graphical as well. If you want to do it inside of our web designer, so I want to open up a web browser and design my processes, I can do that as well. So you have a number of different workflow design tools, as well as those smart objects, those really powerful smart objects that allow you to drag and drop onto your canvas. We'll show a little bit of this in the demonstration, how we can actually create a really robust form tying into our enterprise, our line of business, in a drag and drop fashion. For those of you that might be technical, this will really be great because building ASP.NET forms or InfoPath forms sometimes becomes complex when you want to do things like cascading drop-down lists, etc., and adding a little bit more feature-rich functionality inside of your forms. And then, of course, the reporting capabilities. Lots of out-of-the-box reports that show process information, user performance, as well as tying together, again with those reusable assets, my process information and my line of business information, so I can see how the process is affecting my line of business, and again, because I'm using those reusable smart objects. So we see a little bit of the K2 and SharePoint offerings. Now let's dive into the pillars of K2. What makes K2 more of a platform for building business applications? And again, it's more than just the workflow design experience, which we'll talk about, but it's quite a lot of other things that really make K2 more of a platform than just about the pretty boxes and lines. Let's start with the forms capability, being able to design our forms and our workflows and our reports. So I'm just going to click on my forms here, and we can see as this slide spans out, a number of ways where we can actually leverage K2 from a forms perspective. A lot of drag and drop design experience, and I'll show you in the demonstration how we can create really robust forms tied to our line of business in a drag and drop fashion without having to write code. We can build business rules, so I don't need to write code. I don't need to call a developer. I can write code that says when this button is clicked, do something else on the form, kick off a workflow, etc., again without writing code. I can leverage that existing data. I can tie it to my workflow. I can also extend it, so if there's some controls that you want to have created, and for those of you that are a little bit more technical in building forms, you can extend the out-of-the-box controls and create your own as well. So again, it becomes a drag and drop experience inside of the design experience, but you do have the ability to create more robust forms and controls. And the other nice thing about this is versioning, so making sure that you have versions on your forms as it relates to your workflows as well. So being able to manage multiple versions of our form is really important in this sort of case. If we look at our workflow perspective, so again, not only do we see our forms, but we see a lot of things available to us from a workflow perspective. Being able to stay flexible with our workflows, so they're all declarative, so like everything is within K2. That means that you can design forms or workflows that are interpreted when the workflow runs. So there's no waiting for an application to compile and deploy it. It actually is interpreted as soon as it's running. So your changes are live as soon as you make them. Does it scale? Absolutely. So you can go big or you can go small. K2 workflows can be set up to manage department processes and then of course grow if necessary. So you can leverage your investment in K2 by maybe picking a certain process you want to start with and see if it does well for you. Once you do that, you do have K2 in your environment that you're able to now go build and expand into your largest enterprise and really start adding some volume to that. Number of designers, as I mentioned previously, allowing you to design workflows depending on what environment you're familiar with or comfortable with. And again, the extensibility. Anything in K2 is really extensible, so you can create custom events. So if I want to create a new wizard for our users to use, you can absolutely create that. You can start process instances based on events that occur in your line of business. So if my line of business, I enter a field or I enter a new customer in my line of business, I want to trigger a workflow. You can absolutely create and do that as well. So a lot of flexibility from the workflow perspective when we're building these experiences. And let's just go back one slide here. Let's look at our data. So again, we talked a lot about our data and how we can actually create these reusable assets. So again, using visual tools to create and configure how we connect to our line of business. So we do provide a number of out-of-the-box configurations or access to line of business, things like SharePoint, of course, Active Directory, Exchange, Office 365, CRM, SAP, Salesforce.com. So again, a number of already created reusable assets for you to extend into your enterprise, and of course the ability to connect to systems that we might not have out of the box for. Those are very easy to create and extend and make those reusable design, visual, graphical experiences into your enterprise. So again, smart objects are pretty powerful when you're creating workflows, forms, and also those reports. So let's go back one more slide and talk a little bit about our reporting features. If I can just get my mouse to cooperate there for me. There we go. And finally, our reports. So we want to be able to have visibility into every part of our process, from when that process started, how it interacted with our business, as well as when it ended, some statistics on performance. You can also connect to things like Excel, Power Pivot, SQL reporting services to create those forms. So if you want to do a little bit more BI, our data is accessible right out of the box. Again, we expose that as smart objects as well, so you have the ability to create nice dashboards if you'd like, using tools like Excel, Power Pivot, and SQL reporting services. So again, a lot of features, and this is what we really refer to as the pillars of K2, being able to build and run those business applications, whether inside or outside of SharePoint. All right, so real quickly as we get ready to dive into our demonstration, I just kind of want to throw a slide up here. If you're interested in seeing some of our case studies and things that our customers have done with K2, we have small customers as well as large customers like Kimberly-Clark that are building processes. And so when I say building processes or they're building processes, it's not the IT department or it's not the developers. It's actually business analysts that are building these workflows. So I definitely invite you to visit our website, check out some of our case studies from some of our customers to see what they're doing with K2 in their enterprise. All right, let's get into the demonstration portion of today's webinar. And as I mentioned, I'm going to talk through a little bit of an onboarding, employee onboarding, where we have a job requisition, we have an interview process, and we also have the final onboarding. So there are 3 different processes. We're going to tie them all together. We're going to leverage SharePoint as that collaboration environment so that every bit of that process is visible to everyone. Each department that interacts with these users, from the finance department, making sure that there's budget for the position, to the IT and HR users that are setting up the different user accounts and employee benefits. And just a quick example of that, and something we might see in our everyday life when it comes to HR onboarding, is consider a checklist of what an HR manager might have to go through when they're actually filling out or onboarding an employee. They have to check the offer letter, they have to make sure it's received by a certain time. If they're doing a W-2, they have to make sure it applies to that specific state. And of course, COBRA as well, did they get it within the 90 days, etc. So a lot of things that go through building or creating a HR process, or things that an HR manager needs to do. And this is how we're going to take that into something that we can automate. So we take that complex task list or checklist, kind of break that down and start creating a workflow from that. So this is how we're going to automate that task, being able to take each one of those checklists and make it, instead of the HR manager having to go run around making sure these things are done, K2 can take that information, query the different systems, set up meeting requests, making sure each item is already received before that meeting request is done, and then finalizing the onboarding. So let's kind of take a little example of that. I'm going to just open up my demonstration environment here. And again, I'm using the SharePoint 2010 environment, but we do support 2013. As of today, we support 2013 and 2010 mode. So for those of you that might have or expanding into the 2013 environment for SharePoint, it's definitely supported with K2. So again, what I'm showing you is not going to be so much specific to the environment or which version I'm using, but instead just kind of an example of how we can leverage K2 in that SharePoint environment. All right, so as I mentioned, there are actually 3 different processes, and again, you don't have to set it up as 3 different ones, but in my environment I've done so. I have a job requisition, I have the ability to schedule interviews, as well as start employee onboarding, and also, as you can see, I have some smaller lead requests and expense claims that I also have available to me. So I'm logged in as Cody. I'm going to change users here and now, so we'll kind of keep an eye on our user that we're using. So Cody at this point is our HR manager, and want to make sure that we have an employee coming on board. So I'm going to go navigate to my employee tracking site. Now this is a site I have set up inside of SharePoint that allows me to collaborate on different positions that I've got created inside of my environment here. You can see on my left I've got some form libraries, I've got my approvers, and as you can imagine, my different approvers, I don't have to call IT to set up different approvers. I can simply set that up inside of SharePoint lists to set the different approvers, who my users are as groups as well. And then I've got some nice reporting capabilities for me. First thing I have is a K2 work list that shows me the ability to action tasks, so I don't have to go search my emails, I don't have to search different SharePoint sites. K2 brings to me all tasks that have been assigned to me to access. I also have the ability to see a little report on some activity within my employee tracking site. And then I also have what my active employee tracking cases are, as well as the ones that I've already completed. So I have that ability. Now, one thing I'm going to do is I've already started a specific process. So I've already gone through the job requisition. I've already done the interviews, and for the sake of time, I've done that ahead of time. But I'm going to click into this Senior Applications Developer. So this is the position that I'm currently working on. I'm just going to open up in a new tab here. Now, what you're about to see is I'm leveraging powerful aspects of SharePoint. So I'm creating a folder, if you will, or a SharePoint site that I've provisioned, or that had K2 provision as part of this process, so that I can see everything that has occurred for this position. I can see all the comments that I've made by every user that has touched this case. I can see any tasks, and right now I don't have any just yet. I can see different actions, and my actions change depending on what process I'm in. So if I'm in the interview process, it doesn't make sense to start the employee onboarding. But because I've finished the interview process, I now have the ability to start employee onboarding. I also see job-specific information, so the position itself and the salary range. If I wanted to retrieve information from SAP or as CRM as well, I can show that in my SharePoint site, again leveraging those K2 forms. I can see KPI information, so if I have metrics set for how long I want these specific tasks to take, I can set that up in my environment here. And again, this is all configurable. I haven't coded any of this, and in fact K2 automatically, or in my process, provisioned this site for me and set up this the way this is laid out. And of course this can be modified as well and configured to lay out differently if necessary. As I mentioned, as part of my onboarding, I have 3 different processes that are all interacting with each other. The job requisition, the interview, and of course the actual onboarding. And you can see I can see status of how long it's taking each step to complete. And as I mentioned, I've already gone through the first 2 steps for the HR job requisition and the interview, so I've completed those, and I can see that those have completed. I also have access to my SharePoint calendar, so when I have my interviews set up, as well as I can integrate with Exchange calendars, so I can set up meeting requests for interviews. So this interview I've actually set up on my IT manager's Exchange calendar. So K2 automatically created meeting requests for us so that we can set up these interviews. And we also made some announcements inside of SharePoint saying that Zach has accepted the offer. And of course, our paperwork will show up here as soon as we start our onboarding process. Now, as I mentioned, I have 3 different processes, and you can see my first process is completed, my second process of interview is completed, but I've tied them all together. And this is, again, interacting with my enterprise and the different departments and pulling that all together into that SharePoint nice environment for collaboration. Each one of these processes I have the ability to drill into as well. So I can see how long it took this process to complete, and I actually have the ability to go in and look at the process flow. So I can take a look to see the entire route this process took, from when it was started, what steps were taken, and again, this is from an end user perspective, so if you want to see why a task landed on your lap, you can see that as well. The green lines are the lines that have been taken. The red lines obviously are the lines that were not taken as part of this process. At the end of my process, and this is the job requisition, I'm actually creating a requisition form. So I'm actually calling a sub-process. So I'm generating my archive, and I can jump into a sub-process. So again, you have the ability to really build some robust processes and jump into sub-processes as well. So I can call an IT process. The IT department manages their own process, but HR obviously needs to leverage that, so we need to call that sub-process. So you have a parent process and then sub-processes. And again, it's really being able to leverage that across your enterprise. So you might want to start out with a small, or you may choose to start out with a small process and expand that into your enterprise. Once you have K2 on board, you're able to do that because you have the facilities to do that. All right, so let's start with that onboarding process. So we've done our job requisition, we've done our interview, and now we're ready to onboard this employee. So let's see what that looks like from an end user perspective. So I'm going to click my onboarding, start my onboarding, and what we're going to see is a K2 form. So this is our K2 form that's pulled up, and it's retrieving information relative to the other processes that have completed already. So it's interacting with my Active Directory, it's interacting with my SQL databases, etc. So my drop-down list, this shows me what position is available. So this is the one that has been interviewed for and accepted. And as I select that, you can see my form populates. And again, this is because that position has been interviewed for. It's already got its compensation type to. It's also got the personnel information because this is the user that, or the employee that we've interviewed and accepted. So once I select that, K2 is querying all the different systems to pull that information together and place it on the form so that this user can start the onboarding process. And in my case, I'm going to go ahead and select that it's going to be a full-time position. And depending on what I choose here, my routing in my process might be different. And we'll walk through that in just a moment. We have our compensation. We can also add some comments, starting onboarding. And we'll just kind of type a little comment here so we can see that in our site. Starting onboarding. Here we go. And of course, you can see comment history. And again, this form I've created for this example is just a sample form, and you can lay these out as you'd like. So let's go ahead and start this submission of the onboarding. And again, I can start this process out manually, or once I complete the interview process, I can have K2 automatically start the onboarding. So you have a number of ways to interact with these processes. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go just jump back into that Senior Applications Developer because there's a lot going on behind the scenes once I hit that Submit button. A number of things that are happening. You can see my actions have changed. So I can now cancel. There's no need to start a new one because I'm already in one, and K2 has configured the SharePoint environment to put the appropriate actions in place. And what we'll also see is we now have a new case process, or a new process. So we have this onboarding for this particular employee. So I'm going to open up my view flow so that we can watch this process walk through. And you can see I'm sitting on my HR approval, so I need to make sure that we're starting the onboarding process. Let's go into HR and figure out what we need to do. The nice thing about these is I can actually click on each one of them and find out who the user is, how long it's taking them, what action they've taken. So again, you can see some of the reporting pieces coming to life here as a user of this particular step. So I'm going to open up my browser here. I'm going to use my little shortcut and open up as John, since that's my next user. Now, there's a number of things that are going to happen once John completes his task. So let's go ahead and open up John's task, and you can see he's in SharePoint. He's got a work list item here. He can also open up his email with a link to the form. So he has a number of ways to interact with his task. In my case, I'm going to stay inside the SharePoint environment. I'm going to assume all my users use SharePoint. And again, remember, these forms can be opened up on your mobile device as well. As long as you want those to be open, they can be open in your web page or mobile device, etc. So this particular user needs to set up some onboarding tasks for the HR and IT departments. So we're configuring that we need an ID badge, and IT department needs to order a laptop and provision a user account. And that's pretty much all we're going to do for this user. And again, we can see the different steps as well that have been taken by other users. So let's go ahead and submit this task. And again, our workflow is actually pushing the different actions, approve, send for rework, into my form. So I don't have to change my form or update my form if I add a new action. So maybe there was a decline at this step. K2 will automatically push that into my form. So let's go ahead and prove that. And we're done with John here, so I'm going to close down his web browser. And if we take a look back, we jump back into our view flow, we'll see the process move from our HR approval step into now. And again, we chose full-time, and you can see that we could have taken multiple paths here. We're now sitting and waiting for our benefits enrollment, and we're also waiting for IT. So we've got two different users, two different departments now interacting with this same task, which is really nice to see visually that I'm sitting and waiting for two different people. So if I was sitting here wondering, well, when is this guy coming on board? What's taking so long? I can look at this process flow and say, hey, look, it's Rob's holding up the IT task, or Cody's holding up the HR task. The other nice thing about what we're about to see is once I action these two different users, we've got a step down here that won't complete until both users have completed their task. So it's always nice to be able to have the process wait until we have all approvals. So we're going to see that happen here shortly. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up my IT user. So I'm going to go into my shortcut again, and I'm going to open up my IT user, who happens to be Rob. So I'm going to open up his browser, and again, he has the same ability. He's got his work list. He can also do a couple of other things other than just action his task. He can redirect or delegate that, or if he himself logs in and wants to see the process, he can see it himself. So again, you have that ability. So I'm going to go ahead. You can also configure out of office. So if Rob's going to be out of the office, maybe his task should go to somebody else. He can configure that as well inside of this work list. All right, but for today, we're going to just walk into the task itself. Now, notice that on Rob's tasks, so we see all the information, but Rob likes to lay things out a little different in the IT department, as IT users typically like to do. He likes to use tabs. So not only do we have the ability to show a form, but we also now have the ability to maximize our screen space using tabs. I can now click for network resources and maybe set up my personal drives, etc. So I can add a new row, save that. In this case, we're just going to select the P drive for personal. I can add Active Directory group membership. So if I wanted to add this user to an Active Directory group, I can go ahead and click that and set the Active Directory group. In this case, everything looks good. We've set our P drive, and that's what we need for now. IT is done. And we'll just add a little comment there. So let's go ahead and complete this task. And again, as part of this, IT might have its own separate process, so that process would now kick off for the IT department. So think about all the interaction you have from an onboarding perspective. In this example, how the different users are touching this. You can also see that as part of my task, we did set up Active Directory accounts, created the a mailbox, so we created an Exchange mailbox, so this user can now have access to the systems as well as to their email box. And now we're still waiting on HR. We haven't completed our next step because the system is waiting for that last user, which again is part of our business rules in this case. So I'm going to go into my HR department here and open up Cody. In fact, actually, I'm already opened up as Cody, I believe. Let's just go ahead and take a look. Sure enough, I'm opened up as Cody. Cody likes to say inside of this job requisition or the employee tracking site. So we're just going to refresh our screen here. And again, notifications have come out by email to say, hey, you've got a task. Go ahead and take a look at that. Here we've got a task for Cody here. I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And again, we can see the information that Cody needs to fill out. So his form looks pretty much the same with our position information, our employee information, but his benefits details is what's different. Now the nice thing to see is, and one of the things I didn't point out in the previous screen, the Rob screen for IT, is he also saw position details and the employee information. But again, these are reusable assets, so I didn't have to go recreate 2 different forms or 3 different forms with the same information. I created it once and showed it on multiple pieces. And again, that's because K2 is rendering that at the time. I'm not creating or compiling a code. I'm actually having K2 render these forms relative to which users are actioning the task. This alone would save time in building your forms because I don't have to recreate the same piece of information for every form that a user is going to touch. Create it once, show it multiple places. So let's go ahead and do our 401k benefits here. We'll just do 8% of our contribution. And maybe we need medical, dental, and life. So let's go ahead and add that in. You can see our IT is done, in case that was important for us to know here. And we'll go ahead and submit our task. So now that our task is submitted, I'm going to go ahead and close that window there. We can now see that the completion of the workflow will complete because we've finished both steps that we were waiting on. So you can now see we've finished both steps. Now we're going ahead and generating our request form. So we're generating another form for this particular step in the process. And again, if I want to see what that looks like, I can go into that sub-process and see that it's completed. So again, being able to jump into those sub-processes is a really nice ability. All right, so back in our employee tracking, and again, I'm going to click on our Senior Applications Developer. Let's find out what happened in the actual site, the collaboration site that K2 had set up for everyone to take a look at. So here's our site, and again, our actions changed. We no longer have a task, and in fact, this is actually closed off. This is completed. We see all the tasks and all the comments by everyone. You can see our KPI is good. We're still waiting for a little finishing up on our employee onboarding. But again, you can see how long it took each step. And the other nice thing is now we have the ability to see what paperwork was involved. So as part of the process of the completion is we put the packet together for our employees. So when they come on board, we have all the forms that they need to fill out. So we can just give them the link to this step here. We can also email them the forms that they need to take advantage of. But again, you have everything relative to that employee. Our HR manager doesn't have to juggle the number of employees that are coming through to juggle which ones are full-time, which ones are part-time, who needs the W-4s, who needs I-9s, etc. So again, being able to add that information or have K2 quickly create this portal site for us or the SharePoint site and really leverage that and extend into our enterprise, including the different users from different departments and even the different processes that those departments might be involved in. So again, the IT department having their own process to set up Active Directory and all the tasks they need as well. So again, we can see that very quickly here. So as part of that, again, we can see our task is finished here for this particular user. He's onboarded okay. We're still finishing up some information, and actually we're waiting for a SharePoint timer job. So I want to make sure I'm not overloading my SharePoint site. So I'm waiting on a timer job to finish the process out. So again, the interaction with SharePoint and K2 is very evident in this process. So if we take a look and just kind of refresh my screen here for my employee tracking site, where Cody likes to stay in, we can see that the task is finished. So we can see that it moved from our active to now our closed. And again, it's because we're waiting on the timer job. We can go ahead and close this, and that position is filled. But what kind of reporting do we see out of this? So we saw the individual job that we looked at. We can see the job requisition, the candidate interviews. So we can see the actual forms that were used in those cases. But we might also want to see some of their reports themselves. So we can see the tying together of the employee or the process information with the line of business. So we have the different priorities that were created, which departments were submitting and creating job requisitions for, as well as process information and status, positions by office, whether it's in North America, South Africa, etc., and also by department, so which departments are actually filled up the most with the different tasks or processes for onboarding. So again, these are created out of the box with K2, as well as the ability to see user performance, and again we can click on our application here to see that information. The nice thing, which we'll probably see here, is it's security trimmed. So if I don't have access to see this information, I won't see that information as this particular user. So again, for our management work list as well, you can see any tasks that have been provided to your subordinate as well. All right, so we saw kind of an end user example. I know I'm running out of time here, and I just quickly want to show you how to create these processes and how do we create these forms. So I'm going to close down my web browser there. And actually, I'm going to open up a different web browser. So this is one of our design experiences. I'm using Google Chrome, so it is browser capable, so you don't have to use Internet Explorer. You can use Google Chrome like I'm doing in this case. And this is how you actually design, or one of the design experiences for you to create forms as well as workflows. So we see our employee onboarding. We've got forms, our smart objects. We can see the different smart objects we've got here. Our reusable assets like our views, we call them views, where I see the employee information and I also see the candidate information. I was able to reuse those on multiple forms because I have them created as views. And please keep an eye out for future webinars where we talk a little bit more in depth on how to build forms that show us a little bit more in-depth examples of how to build this. And again, today's webinar is focused on SharePoint Enterprise apps, but be happy to join me for a webinar on smart forms. So let's kind of take a look at employee onboarding real quickly and just see how we created that. So I'm going to edit that form, and I'm just going to close down my left panel here to give me a little bit more screen space. So here's the form that we saw, and again, you can see my image here that I showed my user so they can see what step we're on. And you can see my reusable assets. And on the right, we call those on views. We call those views. So I can see that I have these views, and again, I use my personnel details and my position details. You saw me use that on two different forms for two different departments. So I only created that once because it's the same information. There's no need in recreating the same information, spending time, development cycles to build that. And in fact, this is all drag and drop. So I've got controls like tables, buttons, pictures, etc. And then I also have rules. So I can pass in parameters into my form, and I can also create rules. So when my button is clicked, let's find out what happens on that form from my rules perspective. So here's our rules designer for building forms. When a button is clicked, and you can see it's very grammatical. It's like I'm talking through a sentence. When a button is clicked, then I have some validation if the personnel details, so I want to make sure that there is a person here. Then we want to go ahead and start calling those smart objects. We want to create comments, or we want to create personnel details. So I'm calling smart objects, meaning I'm interacting with my line of business, my enterprise, to update different systems like SAP, SharePoint, SQL. And I'm doing that in a graphical manner, as you can see. So I can call my personnel details, and I can call the create method, and I can configure what exactly I'm going to pass into that. So I can configure that, and I can simply drag and drop. I want to create the email box, I want to create the employee type, the address, etc. So I'm not writing code to update a system. I'm simply grabbing information from my form that the user has filled out, and I'm dragging that onto the canvas to the appropriate method where I'm going to actually create my employee. So as you can see, it's very easy to create forms, and for those of you that might be IT users, this is very powerful because it really allows non-developers to build forms. So a message to the user after I start my workflow, and then navigate to a different page. So again, you have all the typical things that you see when you're building or creating processes or interacting with processes, all being created in this nice tool here. So again, being able to create forms, very easy. So we create our forms, and then I can jump into my workflow. So I can use a form as part of a workflow, and as you can see, I have the ability to just right-click here on my employee onboarding. I have the ability to create views, create forms, and create workflows, as well as smart objects. So if I just quickly jump into one of my smart objects and just show you a quick example, let me go ahead and just refresh that. I'm going to grab my smart object here, maybe my employee details. This actually jumps into Active Directory, so I'm integrating with Active Directory. One of the simplest ways to create a view or a form is to just generate. So I'm going to put a double E in front of this so we can see that it was just created, and I'll put a double E in my list. So I want to be able to enter employee information, and I want to be able to see a list of that. So I'm going to have K2 generate that based on my employee smart object, which integrates with Active Directory. And so here we'll quickly see that happening. So we have a list, and right as soon as I create that, it's available to me. So it's a web page, it's just being rendered, I'm not generating any code. This can actually be shown on a mobile application as well, as it is. Of course, we'd probably want to specify sizing so that it shows up in a proper size for that mobile application. But again, you can see my information for my user. In fact, we now see Zach Wilson. So Zach has got an login ID as well as his password, etc. that was created for this task that we just went through. So we can see that Zach got added to my Active Directory. And again, I can use that right out of the box. And I didn't specify that I wanted filtering and paging, but it does come available to me. So you have the ability to specify if you want that or not. By default, you'll get paging. And again, this list alone would be quite a lot of work to design or create from a developer perspective. And you can see I just generated it real quickly off that smart object interacting with my enterprise. And again, for my details item, let's just go ahead and edit that one and see what we can do with that and show you the drag and drop ability of that. So here I don't want to show the ID necessarily, so I'm just going to delete these. And maybe I want to add, I don't know, a drop-down list. So I can drag and drop that onto the canvas. And maybe I don't want to show my email address or my address. And in fact, I want to span my email across 2 columns. So again, it's very easy to create these forms. You can even add validation on your form. So if I want to make sure my email address is of the proper type, so making sure it has the @ symbol, etc., I can set validation. So again, we have a whole webinar on smart forms. If you're interested in seeing that as well, please feel free to visit me on another webinar in the future on smart forms. But again, just kind of showing you how to create those. Again, you can create a workflow from this as well. I'm going to quickly jump into one of our other designers that allows you to create workflows. And again, you have the ability to draw. So if you like to draw, you can draw. So here I'm creating a mail event. So I can add the email information. You can see it's, again, very wizard-based. If I want to add the originator for this specific step and maybe add a subject, I can, or any attachments. And this is being able to send an email to somebody and add some information for that, what the message body is. Then I can just drag it around and place it in a different area and connect the lines together. So again, this is more of the pretty boxes and lines, but as you can see in what I showed you today, it's much more than just pretty boxes and lines. It's about forms, it's about data, it's about reports, and of course workflow. It's that full platform. All right, so I don't want to spend any more time. I know I have a couple of questions waiting in the queue, so I'm going to go ahead and get to those now. But again, I appreciate your attendance today. I'll go ahead and take some of those questions, but I want to give you some information. If you want information on K2 after today's webinar, you can visit our website. K2 TV shows a lot of great video showcases featuring some of our customer case studies, some of the work that's been done with K2 around enterprise as well as SharePoint. K2 events, again, where you found me today, weekly online webinars. We do things from smart forms to more simple SharePoint workflows to more advanced workflows as well. And if you want to email us, you can visit us at webinars@k2.com, and we'll take those questions if you don't get to them today. Visit us at our website, k2.com, where you can see the K2 TV, K2 events, case studies, as well as if you like what you saw but you really want to try it and get your hands on it, you can get a 30-day trial visiting our website. Click on the Try Now link. We'll spin up a site for you that you can actually go in and build some workflows. So lots of resources available to you. And again, I appreciate you attending today's webinar.